As we get started, I want to set the stage for what you'll be learning in this specific module. GitHub Codespaces is all about making development faster, more consistent, and much more flexible, no matter where you're working from. My name is Peter Detender. I'm a lead technical trainer here at Microsoft. Throughout this session, I'll walk you through how Codespaces fits into your daily development workflow and why it has become such a powerful tool for modern DevOps teams. My goal is to help you not just understand what it is, but also see how it can meaningfully improve the way you build, test, and collaborate on code. In this module, I'll introduce you to the core idea behind GitHub Codespaces. It's a cloud-based development environment that's already configured with basically everything you need to start coding immediately. So instead of spending time installing runtimes, SDKs, extensions, and tools on your local machine, the environment launches with your project setup already in place. By the end of this module, you'll understand how the Codespaces lifecycle works from start to finish. You'll also see how you can tailor your environment to suit your personal workflow. Things like syncing your settings, using dot files, and customizing the underlying container. And then before we wrap up, I'll show you how Codespaces compares to the lightweight GitHub.dev editor, so you know exactly when to choose one over the other. Now let's start with what GitHub Codespaces actually is. Again, at its core, a codespace is an on-demand development environment running in a cloud, built from a container that's configured right inside your repository. So what that means is, every time you create a codespace, it launches with the same tools, the same runtimes, the same dependencies, creating a fully consistent setup from one developer to the next. So it's no more, it works on my machine problem, right? Because now everyone is starting from the exact same baseline. One of the biggest advantages is that it works seamlessly with Visual Studio Code, whether you prefer the browser or the desktop application. So you can open a codespace and start coding within seconds without installing anything locally. And you can switch devices from your main workstation to a laptop or even a tablet without losing your environment. This flexibility, combined with that standardized setup, makes Codespaces ideal for distributed teams, for quick experimenting, onboarding new developers, or basically any scenario where you need a clean environment that just works. From here, I want to walk you through the Codespaces lifecycle, which is essentially the different ways you can create and use Codespaces depending on where you are in your development process. You're not limited to creating a codespace only when starting a new project, but you can spin it up from multiple points in your repository. So for example, you can create a codespace directly from a template when kicking off a new idea, or from a specific branch if you want to focus on a particular feature or working on a bug fix. So you can also open a codespace straight from a pull request, which is incredibly useful for reviewing changes in an environment that mirrors production. Instead of running the project locally, you can explore code, run the tests, and then validate the behavior inside a real environment. And if you need to investigate something from the past, you're even able to create a codespace from a specific commit. Again, this flexibility turns every part of your repo into a launch point for development, making it much easier to explore, to test, and maybe troubleshoot with confidence. Now, based on the previous explanations, you might think that all codespaces are the same, but that's not the case at all. It's totally possible to personalize your codespace so it feels more familiar and more comfortable. I think one of the most powerful features is the ability to sync with your VS Code settings automatically. So your local themes, your keyboard shortcuts, your editor preferences basically follow you whether you're working on the browser or on your desktop application. This helps your environment feel consistent, even though it's, again, running in cloud. You can also take things a step further using what we call .files repository. This lets you apply your preferred shell profiles, scripts, and other command line customizations every time a new code space gets created. Another benefit is the ability to rename your code spaces. So if you work across multiple projects, this can make it a lot easier to keep track of what each environment is for. And because you can open multiple terminals with different shells, combining that with your .files setup gives you a really flexible development experience. It's these small touches, they eventually add up, making code spaces feel like that natural extension of your day-to-day workflow instead of a separate environment you need to adjust to. But we're not done yet. Beyond settings and the .files, you can also customize the underlying machine type that powers your code space. This is especially helpful if you're working on resource-intensive workloads, like compiling large code bases or running multiple services simultaneously. You can scale up to a more powerful configuration when needed and then scale back down when you're working on lighter tasks. So this kind of on-demand performance control means you can optimize speed but also cost without committing to high-powered hardware as a local machine. You also get control over your default editor and the region where your code spaces are hosted. So choosing your region isn't just about geography. It also affects latency and data residency, which can matter a lot in enterprise environments. You can also set the timeout period that determines when your code space automatically suspends due to inactivity, helping you balance convenience and resource efficiency. And then maybe most importantly, it also helps you controlling costs. Now, talking about all this, some of you might have experience with what we call the GitHub.dev editor. So what actually is that difference between Codespaces and that GitHub.dev editor? Although they sort of look similar at first, they serve very different purposes. GitHub.dev is that lightweight browser-based editor that lets you explore a repository, navigate files, and make quick edits, all without running any code. I think it's perfect for small fixes, updating some documentation, or maybe reviewing someone else's work when you don't need that full environment behind it. Where then Codespaces, on the other hand, gives you that complete development environment with a real container, real tools, debuggers, and basically everything you need to run and test your code. So if you need to execute commands, install packages, run tests, and really start debugging an application, that's where Codespaces is the right choice. Again, think of GitHub.dev as your quick notebook, and then Codespaces maybe as a full-featured workstation. Knowing when to use each one helps you stay productive without over-engineering your workflow. As you can imagine, talking about Codespaces is great, but you can imagine I had another demo coming up. In this next demo, I'll take you through the full experience of working inside a GitHub Codespace. We'll start by creating a new environment directly from a repo, and from there exploring the different options available during setup. You're going to see how quickly the environment becomes usable, how your settings and your extensions nicely carry over, and how the interface mirrors that local VS Code experience, so there's basically no learning curve. And then from there, I'll show you what it's like to code inside a Codespace. Opening files, running commands, installing dependencies, all of that works using familiar tools. You also get a look at how easy it is to personalize that environment and how GitHub extension helps streamline interactions between source code issues, pull requests, and your workflows. So by the end of the demo, you'll have a clear idea how Codespaces fits in your daily development routine. As you can imagine, I'm super excited to demo Codespaces, and it's really one of my even more favorite features of GitHub, if GitHub on its own is not already one of my favorites. But it's really showing you how easy, how convenient it is using your code base in a different environment than your local development workstation. So the typical scenario, I guess, is that you move into the repo and you're gonna move to the repo code button. You're gonna copy it to your local machine. Like again, the git clone operation in the background where I could copy this link. I would open up my command prompt. And then, although I already have it, but let's say I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this the new demo cats. And then I would move into the new demo cats, and then I would run git clone and pointing to the repo. But that's already a couple of steps too much. Why? Because we could actually make this shorter, where now I could, from any space in your local machine, I could do git clone, providing that link, and then after the URL, I can now define the name that I want to use. If I don't specify the name, it's going to use the name of my repo as the default. So I cannot really use new demo cats because it's already created. So let's do demo cats 2. It's going to clone, everything's there. And then obviously from here, I can navigate and the full code is in there and my Git folder's there, like everything that I need on my local machine. And then from here, I would just start my VS Code write. And then continue working from here. Where now the same scenario is like, I need to write code, I want to update my changes, I'm working on issues, working on bug fixes. But for whatever reason, my local development machine is not available. Maybe it's running something else. Maybe literally there's a physical, technical issue with it. And you don't want to use that as an excuse to not work on your code updates. So what we're going to do is go back to GitHub. And instead of navigating or selecting local, we're now going to use Codespaces. Remember from the presentation, you need a license to use this, but even on the free edition, if you're not watching this out of like a corporate user, you can actually enable Codespaces, and it's going to give you obviously limited compute and limited amount of hours. But if you go like, oh, Peter, cool demo, I want to play with this myself, know that you can actually do that. So I'm going to select my Codespaces, and just out of like pre-prepping the demo to speed certain things up, you can see that I do have 2 Codespaces already up and running. Nothing blocks me thanks to having a pretty big plan behind the scenes that allows me to create multiple of these. But the only thing I have to do is select code, Codespaces, new Codespaces, and it might take like a couple of seconds depending on the size of the repo, but typically like 20, 30 seconds and everything is up and running. This is, if you ask me, like really, really cool. All the files that I talked about in all my previous demos are here and I can immediately continue my development work. I can still work with other extensions. So I showed you a few extensions before, and you can see that all of these are also becoming available. The ones that I already installed, like the GitHub is here, GitHub Copilot, that we'll talk about later on, is over there. And that's where you can now keep those 2 environments in sync as well. I can write code. I'm going to misuse my little markdown environment, adding more code changes. I save my file, Control S on the Windows machine. My source control from like module 1 and 2 kicks in. I'm going to commit my changes, adding more changes. I commit. I'm going to synchronize, making sure that everything is nicely in sync. And it's already telling me like, hey, do you want to run this every now and then a little bit automatic, which means in my local VS Code before, it was exactly the same behavior. So it looks and feels like VS Code in the browser, like exactly the same thing that you could expect. But that's not all I can show you. If we navigate away from the actual running Codespaces and we navigate to GitHub.com, just Codespaces directly, again, obviously the assumption is that you are authenticated, pretty obvious. It's going to show you your repositories. So these are like my recent used repositories, not just the one with Codespaces. But now I can look into my demo cats here, and it's going to show me my actual running machines, like the Codespaces machines, virtual machine compute in the background. I didn't specify a lot here, I just went with the defaults, and this is something that on organization, team, or enterprise level, someone within the organization can define what kind of virtual machine compute you can use. Because like I mentioned in the presentation, you might have a quick task, like maybe updating the README file, doesn't need a lot of compute, but what if you literally want to run your actual workloads, your actual environments? So that's where you can define smaller or larger compute power. And again, the idea obviously is that this all comes with a cost, and maybe you don't have access to all virtual machine types, but that's individual per organization. You can define a runtime. So what we have, like in my case within Microsoft, I can spin up a code space, but if it's not being used for a certain amount of time, I get a notification like, hey, you got code spaces running. Is it okay if I automatically delete them? Or you can manually stop them, and then obviously you're in control, lowering the cost, like the consumption cost, right? If you don't need that machine anymore. The other integration is that although I'm inside my code spaces here, I can now jump to open in Visual Studio Code. So what the idea behind this is that you could start in cloud and then from there going back to your local machine. Or you could do the opposite, where I'm going to navigate to my local machine. I'm inside my demo cats repo. I'm inside my VS Code branch from another demo earlier in the presentations. I'm going to select, and I know it's a little bit small, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, but we have this remote control option. If I navigate to this little button, open remote window, it's going to trigger the command palette. And I do have a few options here. I can use dev containers, which is kind of like Codespaces, but not exactly the same. So not going to bore you with that, but it just shows up in the list. So I'm going to connect to an existing Codespace, or why not yet creating another one. So if I connect to Codespaces, it's going to present me a list of all my previously recent, at least, running Codespaces from the one like 4 minutes ago, all the way to typically like about a month back in time. And this is again, a policy, a configuration that someone within your GitHub environment can actually control. Since I had my demo cats, I'm still working in my demo cats repo. I had my Codespaces from a couple of minutes ago. I just want to connect to that one. For now, this is going to take maybe a couple of seconds longer, but what it's going to do is now bringing in my cloud-based virtual machine Codespaces environment and using my VS Code, local VS Code, as some sort of gateway justy interface. All the code changes that I'm making are now happening in the Codespaces, but it looks and feels like it's all running on my local machine. So in short, cloud-based environment, local environment, no excuse for not working on code anymore if you don't have your machine available right away. Knowing that there is some Codespaces consumption costs, the size of the VM has impact on the cost, the runtime of the VM has obviously impact on the cost. But apart from that, everything that you know out of like VS Code integration is also available. And then if you want, keeping those two environments in sync is totally doable. I think that's all for now, so let's wrap it up in the presentation. That was pretty much it for this module. So let me summarize the key things you should know and feel comfortable with. You've learned what GitHub Codespaces is and how it simplifies development by giving you that ready-to-use cloud environment. You've also seen how its lifecycle works, from creating a code space through templates, branches, commits, or even pull requests. And I guess you should now also be able to distinguish clearly between Codespaces and GitHub.dev, knowing when to use each tool to stay efficient. To wrap up our session, I want to thank you for following along as we explored GitHub Codespaces. You've seen how it can transform the way you work by giving you a fast, consistent, and flexible development environment wherever you are. But also remember, there are many different ways to continue scaling up. One is following me to the next video, where I'm going to talk about GitHub security best practices. Or maybe you want to take a little step out of the GitHub zone and exploring so many other learning paths on aka.ms/learn. Thank you once more for being here. I'm pretty sure I'm going to see you again soon.